Good day, folks. It's Wayne Duvenage from OUTA here, and welcome to this week's weekly wrap. First week of December, done and dusted. And let me tell you, as we slide into December, South Africa clearly did not get the memo to slow down. I mean, this week's country political and corruption-infused landscape delivered drama and accountability, and if not enough of it, though. I mean, we need a lot more accountability, but it was infused with layers of confusion and obfuscation. And as always, comedy is thrown into the mix. There always is when it comes to some of the clowns that are given too much power, far too much power in managing South Africa. Really, it is a debacle, and we saw a lot of that unfolding. But before I get into the meat of this week's overview, can I just ask that if you haven't already done so, please subscribe and like this video and this channel and share it as widely as possible. It's important that we get our message and the work of anti-corruption initiatives out there into the nation as much as possible. So let's start where the whole nation started off this week with the Madlanga Commission. Monday opened with the uncomfortable testimony from Ekurhuleni's past city manager, Imogen Mashazi. And this, her input just contained a host of allegations that related to bullying and abusive behavior and rape allegations within the Metro Police Department. Seriously, it was a debacle, and what unfolded was just really widespread condemnation of Mashazi's arrogant and disrespectful demeanor during the hearing. Just listening to her explains how she dodged questions about her account, just her inability, quite frankly, to take control and manage serious matters of misconduct. One wonders, how is it possible to have such people in leadership and in charge of running a metro like this? It just is no wonder why Ekurhuleni is in such a mess. But nothing prepared us for Wednesday, and if guilty had a look, it would be Ekurhuleni's Metro Police head Julius Mkhwanazi. Man, did he sweat like a sumo wrestler eating a tub of chilies in a sauna. Every tough question from evidence leaders have put to him, he was just reaching out for more and more water. At one stage, I thought the commissioner actually was going to have to pause to fetch a mop. It was almost funny and yet tragic to just watch how he was trying to manage himself in the commission. But humor aside, I mean, the issues raised were very serious, and the EMPD's top cop evidence was conflicting. It was stuffed with evidence of political interference in the bureaucratic management of the JPM or the EMPD, and we just saw public collusion unfolding. We saw structural oversight failures, and all of this just points to serious systemic risks and failures in municipal policing. His testimony gave us a clear picture of what institutionalized corruption looks like. And we also saw new details about Molefe's arrest chaos, the fake Hawks alarm, contradictory orders between police units. These are just deep concerns about political interference coming to the fore inside the structures of our policing services. But it was on Tuesday that suspended Minister Senzo Mchunu took to the central seat and literally continued to stick to his story about why he disbanded the political killings task team. No bribery, no interference, no wrongdoing on his behalf or on his part. Well, that's according to him. However, what was clear was that Mchunu did not consult or confide or engage with the Commissioner of Police about this very important decision that he took. And that's a big error. That is a big error, because if you're going to do so, you need to engage. You cannot step into the ring as somebody who has oversight and is not in charge of the operations. That's not how you do it, Minister. And if anything, from this week's evidence at the Madlanga Commission gave us was this understanding that aside from the sheer negligence by people in positions of power, there was, and most likely still is, very much so, active structural interference in policing operations. And this alone sharpens the case for independent oversight, for the depoliticization of the enforcement units, for just seriously much needed systemic reform. So at the end of it all, Madlanga and the Commission is scheduled just for another week. And I think we're going to see a couple more witnesses to testify and possibly shed more light around the confusion and the fiasco of that Molefe arrest. But given that the state president is expecting his first report from this commission by the 17th of December, and a lot of postponements of some of these testimonies, which will only be heard in the new year, we'll probably find that this last week, this final week, is a critical one for evidence that needs to find its way into this first report. So let's see what happens in this last week. On the parliamentary side, we know that the ad hoc committee has wrapped up its inquiry for the year. So there was no new testimony this week coming out of the ad hoc committee. They will return in 2026. And this, I think, just gives them some time to sort through the mountain of allegations already on the table. And judging by the contradictions and the political battles and the money trails that have already been exposed, they're going to need every minute of this break to get on top of and try and decipher what's been happening in our criminal justice system that has been infiltrated without a doubt. But now let's turn to some other matters. The first one is this questionable conduct by the city of Johannesburg, who voted to push ahead with this 230 Rand monthly electricity fixed charge that they applied to prepaid electricity users over a year ago, in the middle of last year. And it was a decision back then that was met with widespread outrage and frustration, more so because it does impact on the poorer sectors of community, middle and lower income households, and it's a big increase to their monthly electricity bill. And it was one that had very little public engagement, and one that they said they would review and take a look at and see whether they were going to undo that decision. Well, they simply haven't, and they voted to continue to do so. And we spoke out about this at the time because it really is a failure that hasn't commanded enough input and respect of citizens by the city of Johannesburg. And speaking about electricity matters, I can tell you now, on this whole solar registration issue, OUTA believes that Eskom and municipalities are misinterpreting and contradicting national law when it comes to seeking permissions. And in fact, it's not even asking us to register, but what we are seeing is that they want us to get permission from the municipality or Eskom before you introduce or install rooftop solar in your premises. And we believe that there are too many municipalities and Eskom going down different paths and creating a lot of confusion. There's so many opinions that are flying around, and quite frankly, both the rights of the electricity distributors and those of the user are being confused now. And what we are seeing, and certainly getting following input from our specialists in this space, is that there's no doubt that there's a lot of overreach by the authorities, by the electricity distributors. And we need to sort this out. And I have no doubt it's also going to end up in a court of law. We are certainly a long way down the road of preparing for that eventuality, and let's see how this unfolds. But for now, we continue to say to residents out there, people with under 100 kilowatts of solar energy embedded into their home systems and business systems that are not pushing back into the grid, do not register. And we'll bring you up to date more about this in the next coming weeks or months. This week, another issue that unfolded was the Ithala Bank debacle. It hit the headlines again. And it all stems from a bank that was allowed to set up, or be set up, by the way, by the KwaZulu-Natal provincial government, which effectively forced a number of municipalities and public entities to deposit funds into this bank, which didn't have a full commercial banking license. Remember VBS? Again, we have these debacles unfolding. And it raises serious legal and financial risks to society. And what we've seen is leaked correspondence and whistleblower accounts of suggested political pressure that was channeled to put public money into Ithala to prop up the struggling entity. And what is unfolded is that we, you and I, the taxpayer, are going to have to bail it out by over 2 billion rand. And once again, as with the criminal justice system, we just see this outrageous pattern of political interference, and this time in financial mismanagement that causes much pain and anguish to citizens in this country, and a lot of money that we don't have. We can ill afford to have to bail out banks of this nature. It is, quite frankly, another debacle we shouldn't have had to endure. But let's go back to Parliament now, where media commentary highlighted that two crucial bills aimed at professionalizing the public service and which also impact on officials at municipal level have been passed by Parliament late in 2025, but they are awaiting the President's signature. They're on his desk. And these are the Public Service Amendment Bill, which seeks to depoliticize the public service and banning accounting officers and senior public servants from holding office in a political party. But more importantly, though, this bill will devolve administrative powers from politicians and put the powers into the heads of departments. This is what should be happening, and so this bill is going to enforce that. We need it signed. Another one of these bills is the Public Administration Management Amendment Bill, which seeks to prevent government employees from conducting business with the state. I mean, how crazy is that? I thought this was in place a long time ago, but can you believe it, that we now need a bill to ensure that there is governance at this level, that a person who works for or heads up a department in government should not be able to do business with that department. Not only that person, but their family members. Well, if you ask a lot of these people in positions of power about this, they will see nothing wrong with it. They think that they're entitled to do business with with government departments. And we know many of them are. Many of them and their family members own companies who provide services and goods to government departments. How crazy and how conflicted is that? So we need these bills signed as soon as possible, Mr. President. We need to start enacting them so that we can stop this conflict and this abuse of power and inflated contracts that just go nowhere and money is lost to the system. We need to make sure that this manipulation of the processes stops. It is quite pathetic that it is actually happening in the first place. So if these bills are intended to create more professional and merit-based and ethical public administration across all spheres of government, including municipalities, we just cannot wait another minute for these bills to be enacted. In another development on the governance front, Public Service and Administration Minister Senzo Mchunu announced this week that government will be introducing a public service offender register. This is like a centralized platform that lists all public servants who are found guilty of corruption and mismanagement and irregular conduct, effectively to create a do not hire database and stop these implicated officials from quietly resurfacing elsewhere in the government sector. We've seen them before, many of them. They get fired here and they resurface somewhere else. Cadre deployment on steroids is taking place. Well, this is good news, but you would have thought it would have been in place a long time ago. We really do need to close this long abused loophole where officials resign before disciplinary process conclude, only to be rehired in another department. So while it's a welcome announcement by Minister Buthelezi, we want to caution, though, that this initiative will only have real impact if that list is transparent and it is regularly updated, and it is backed by firm consequences for those departments who ignore this list of people who've been flagged for wrongdoing. But we also believe that civil society should be involved in giving input here, because much like Treasury's restricted supply database, onto which all companies and their directors who have misled and provided poor service and been involved in corruption of the government are supposed to find their ways onto this restricted supply database. It doesn't. It's not updated enough. And there are thousands of companies that should be on that list and that aren't. So while these are two good tools to stop corruption in government, they're not utilized properly. They're not implemented properly. They're a waste of time. And we need that fixed. And we hope that government starts to engage with civil society so that we can help them introduce and put in place the checks and balances that make these systems work. Otherwise, they're just not worth the paper they're written on. So yeah, more good news that is coming. When it's spoken about, it's the implementation that is always the problem here. This week, education also made headlines when Parliament rejected the proposal to raise the matric pass rate to 50%. It's just crazy. You know, South Africa just cannot keep celebrating a 30% pass rate and pretending that we are preparing the youth for the future. We owe our youth far more than these lowered expectations. And quite frankly, the youth coming out of our government schools are largely unemployable. And this is not me saying so. You just have to speak to business and academia and universities who find the level of matriculant pass rates well below that which is required to enable successful entry into universities and the job market. Our basic education system is failing our youth, just as our higher education ministry is doing the same by reappointing people like the CEO of Insurance SETA, Gugu Mkhize, for another 5 years, despite repeated qualified audits and a lack of transparency when it comes to dealing with dubious and what we call corruption-fueled and infused tender awards. This mind boggles that the minister can just look away, put his head down, this is Minister Manamela, and go ahead and appoint some of these SETA CEOs against this backdrop. It is shocking, quite frankly. And while all of this is unfolding, the world prepares for Anti-Corruption Day on the 9th of December. And South Africa heads into it with more public focus on corruption than we've ever seen in years. But focus means nothing without real action. And we need to see action. And next week, the interviews for the National Director of Public Prosecutions begins. And this is a decision that is an important one. And it is one that will have big impact on shaping accountability in the criminal justice system environment over the next decade or so. And what South Africa needs is somebody in this department and in this position who is fearless, principled, and independent. And this is not a time to repeat old mistakes and appoint somebody who just cannot stand up to the political interference or demand the resources and systems urgently needed to improve the capacity and the effectiveness of the NPA. The fact that somebody like Menzi Simelane even made it to the top 6 candidates of the NPA selection list suggests that something is seriously amiss in this process. That is sad, but we'll have to see what happens in this space. This week, we also saw an important week for whistleblowers, whereby Tumiso Puti, you might have remembered her from one of our interviews that we did with her. Well, she received recognition by an international organization called Blueprint for Free Speech that recognizes whistleblowers who stand up against inept and, quite frankly, nefarious activities taking place in government departments. And in this case, it was the management at Construction SETA to whom Puti stood up to and really called out the corruption that was taking place at the SETA, or it's known as the Construction SETA. So well done to Tumiso. And by the way, let's not forget all whistleblowers who really have got in the way of corrupt officials and called them out. Sadly, too many of them have just lost their jobs, their livelihoods on trumped-up charges and suspended for the wrong reasons and just removed from the system so that they can just be taken out of the way of the corrupt activities. Worst of all, people like Babita Deokran and others who've lost their lives. And speaking about Babita Deokaran, I'll be attending the inaugural Babita Deokaran annual lecture at the University of Stellenbosch next week, where many leaders and people who work tirelessly in the anti-corruption space will be celebrating the courage and triumph of whistleblowers. This week, I had the privilege of addressing delegates at a conference hosted at the South African Institute of Government Auditors. Now, one might think that is an oxymoron, because there is a lot missing in the auditing of government institutions. And my message to them was quite frank and direct, and it got to the heart of the problem that we have in the public sector when it comes to internal audits. These are the people who are supposed to raise the flags and report boldly and directly on poor governance that takes place in our many government institutions and municipalities. But quite frankly, too many of them have become box tickers, as opposed to being the first line of defense for the taxpayer. South Africa needs auditors and internal auditors in the government space who are ethical and principled and fearless. But far too often they are bullied, they are fired and even assassinated when they do report on dubious conduct and activities of poor governance that unfolds in government departments. And what we need to do is to find a solution to this problem. And this solution needs to be sourced collectively by the Auditor General's Office in collaboration with IRBA, the independent regulator for regulatory board for auditors. I believe SALGA needs to be involved, and all of these other institutions that oversee the auditing industry. Because if we don't fix that, if we don't provide them with the safety nets and the advice and the platforms that protect them from reporting properly and boldly, then their roles as auditors become meaningless to civil society. This week I also attended a very good conference coordinated by CASAC, the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution, at which discussions, really rich discussions and input was gathered from an array of experts and thought leaders when it comes to proposing reforms that we should be seeing to address the failures that permeate our criminal justice system and our constitutional structures, the likes of which actually we're seeing laid bare at the Madlanga Commission. And I must say, the experts and the people in that room and the level of discussion was just thought-provoking. It was powerful stuff. And if only our political leaders could have heard these discussions and debates and the proposed solutions, because if they did and could implement them, wow, we would just be able to advance this country's prosperity immensely. And so despite all our challenges, it is these think tanks, I can tell you, that make me hopeful, because good things do come out of these sessions, albeit not fast enough. That brings us, folks, to the end of a full week. It was a very full week in the space of OUTA's work, but it was a week that exposed cracks and raised questions. It brought forward new whistleblowers, and it showed us what meaningful oversight needs to look like. This was a week that reminded us that accountability does work, and that corruption is happening every day of the week. And the corruption, we know, doesn't take a break over December, not any holiday period for that matter. So as always, I just want to thank you for watching and supporting OUTA's work. We rely entirely on public donations, if you don't know that already. And let me just ask you, please, if you can, visit our website at outa.co.za. This helps us, this input, this support helps us do the work that we do. Every contribution makes a difference. So until next week, stay strong, stay safe, and stay engaged. Thank you.